Let's start now with a Fox News alert. Now we're watching this situation closely. Dire matter in Northern California now. 200,000 people forced from their homes this weekend because of fears that parts of the country's tallest dam might give way. That's the Oroville Dam outside of San Francisco. The dam is holding strong, but an emergency spillway could unleash massive floodwaters on several communities downriver. We will have a live report from the scene as we watch this developing story on a Monday morning. First, though, is there a new immigration order in the works now? The White House striking a new defiant tone about the future of President Trump's travel ban, saying that all options are on the table. And news on this could come at any moment. So hope you had a great weekend in February. Welcome to Monday. I'm Bill Hemmer, and look who's back today. Nice to see you.
It is good to see you,
Welcome
too.
Back here.
Thank you. I'm Shannon Bremen from Martha McCallum. President Trump vowing to push against criticism and legal setbacks surrounding his immigration policy, saying America's security will not be compromised. The White House says it is examining every angle.
We'll also talk about the unfortunate part is it takes time statutorily, so it takes a little time. We'll win that battle. But we also have a lot of other options, including just filing a brand new order. Could very well be, but I'd like to keep you, I'd like to surprise you. We need speed for reasons of security, so it could very well be that we do.
And there is this today, President Trump facing an unexpected test from North Korea. Pyongyang conducting another banned ballistic missile test this weekend. President Trump responding with a simple affirmation of our strong U.S. ties with Japan. The U.S. also requesting an emergency meeting with the UN Security Council in New York that could come later today.
A very busy day. And we begin with Chief White House Correspondent John Roberts. All right, John, let's start with the travel ban, the travel pause, whatever you want to call it, but definitely a defiant tone from the White House.
Shannon, good morning to you. Yes, the president not backing down one bit in his plans to dramatically increase the vetting of refugees or other visitors or immigrants who would come into this country. We don't exactly know what they are planning at this point. They've had the weekend to think about it. There are a couple of executive orders, draft ones, that have been floating around for a while now, one of which would abandon the Obama-era plans to close down the detention facility at Guantanamo Bay, Cuba, and instead keep it open indefinitely. On the immigration ban, the White House trying to determine the best way forward. The one thing that they don't want to do is lose twice in court on this, because the PR blow against the executive order could be just irreparable if they were to lose a couple of times. One option that they're toying with is to write a new executive order that has specific carve-outs for people like legal permanent residents, people who might be in the country already on an immigration visa or a student visa or a work visa, because as you'll know, a lot of people had problems getting back into the country in the early days after that executive order was put in place. But according to the president's top policy advisor, Stephen Miller, all options are currently on the table.
We are considering and pursuing all options. Those options include seeking an emergency stay at the Supreme Court, continuing the appeal with the panel, having an emergency hearing en banc, or going to the trial court in the district level and a trial on the merits. They also include, as you've mentioned, the possibility of new executive actions designed to prevent terrorist infiltration of our country.
Now, something could come as early as today or more likely a little bit later on in the week. And there's something else interesting going on, Shannon, that I know will intrigue you watching the Supreme Court as you do. Late on Friday night, one of the judges from the Ninth Circuit asked for the entire circuit to vote on whether or not the case that was turned down by the Ninth Circuit, that's on the temporary restraining order, should be heard, quote, en banc, with a panel of 11 judges reviewing it. The White House and the opposing states have been asked for briefs. They've got until 2 o'clock Thursday to file those. I've talked to folks at the White House here. They think because the court is asking for this, at this point there's nothing to lose, so they may go that route. Shannon?
Yeah, it's a bit unusual, but yeah, it could be a winning strategy for them, even though they're not the ones instigating it.
Potentially.
Yeah, okay, so President Trump also reacting to a new threat this weekend as North Korea launches yet another missile.
Yeah, typical provocation from Kim Jong-un, just testing the new president, the new administration to see what the response is going to be. It happened when the president was hosting the Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe down at Mar-a-Lago. Abe reacting very strongly, calling it an absolutely intolerable act. The response from the president, much more muted than that. Nothing on the launch specifically, but a strong pledge to stand side by side with Japan.
I just want everybody to understand and fully know that the United States of America stands behind Japan, its great ally, 100%.
Today, the business on the table here at the White House, in addition to the immigration ban and what to do about it, the president is hosting the Canadian Prime Minister, Justin Trudeau. They will be meeting together with a group of women entrepreneurs, women CEOs, launching the U.S.-Canada Council for the Advancement of Women Entrepreneurs and Business Leaders. And I know, Shannon, you've been waiting for me to say it. You've been waiting to hear it. So, yes, Prime Minister Dreamy is coming to Washington.
Watch out. It could be a busy day at the White House. A lot of looky-loos. All right, John. Thank you.
Photo to follow. Let's get analysis now on both. Byron York, chief political correspondent, Washington Examiner today, Fox News contributor. Byron, good Monday to you.
Good morning, Bill.
Let's start with immigration. What is your best guess on this?
Well, as you heard John and the President say, that there are a whole lot of options, but I think the idea of amending or writing a new executive order will probably happen, and this is the reason. If you look at the transcripts of court arguments, if you look at the briefs filed in this case, this is what happens. We know the original order did not have an exemption for so-called green card holders, legal permanent residents. It didn't have one. So then the White House counsel issued guidance saying, well, this order does exempt green card holders. Well, what's happened is the court says, well, that's nice if the White House counsel says it, but he could change that at any time. The order still says what it says. So I think to get around that problem, you're likely to see the White House come up with a new executive order or amend the one that was, already put
they
forward.
could just write a new one there. John was reporting there that maybe it comes today, but perhaps not.
Well, they didn't. Part of the problem with this executive order is they didn't take enough time doing it to begin with. So they do make the case that there is an urgent need for security of people coming into the country from these 7 affected countries. On the other hand, they don't want to just get ahead of themselves again, and so taking a little more time to make sure they've got everything right would probably be a smart thing to do.
Let me move to North Korea right now. January 2nd, several weeks ago, this was the tweet that came from Donald Trump. North Korea just stated that it's in the final stages of developing a nuclear weapon capable of reaching parts of the U.S. He concludes it won't happen. Okay, there was a test over the weekend. There's no indication this was an ICBM, which is what you need in order to reach, let's say, Hawaii, for example. At the same time, when you look at his measured response from the Japanese Prime Minister, even the New York Times went so far as to write this, Peter Baker, if North Korea was testing the new president, as many analysts believe, then Mr. Trump seemed intent on showing that he would not be baited into a confrontation every time an American adversary tried to provoke him, end quote. Your analysis of his reaction then?
Well, there's also the question of what he could do and what he could threaten. I mean, the United States and other countries have already put a lot of sanctions on North Korea. It's probably the most isolated country in the world. You could have more support for missile defense, but a lot of what you could do about North Korea has already been done. I would contrast this with the president's reaction when Iran tested a missile, and the White House immediately said they were putting Iran, quote, on notice. And remember, we all talked about what on notice might mean. In this case, much more subdued, but a strong show of support for Japan, with the Japanese Prime Minister standing right next to the President.
Thank you, Byron. Byron,
thank you, Bill.
In Washington, D.C. We're going to get a lot, dig in deeper in all this today. Thank you, sir. Analysis there in D.C. Shannon?
Yeah, we're going to get more reaction from the White House to all of this right here live. White House Deputy Press Secretary Sarah Huckabee Sanders is going to join us in the next hour as we continue to follow all of these developments.
I think it's an interesting response there from Byron, too. When you look at the response that we had with Iran, with Michael Flynn coming in the briefing room, much more muted regarding North Korea. So,
and there are lots of options, and apparently all on the table.
There are. So you were at the beach, right? Now you come back to gray, beautiful New York. And
you gotta love it.
Oh my God!
You gotta love it.
It's great to have you back.
Well, I missed you, so I had to come back.
Just a little bit.
Yeah, a little bit.
Making national security a priority, President Trump had promised to return to the Reagan foreign policy doctrine.
As the general was also speaking about Ronald Reagan, he said that wisdom comes in 3 very, very strong words: peace through strength.
So now you have a missile test from North Korea, putting President Trump to the test. How should he respond? Former UN Ambassador John Bolton is up next on that today. Plus, there's this morning.
What democracy looks like. What democracy looks like. This is what democracy looks like.
Chaotic like scenes for lawmakers back home. Protesters on both sides of the Obamacare issue flooding meetings and demanding answers. Very reminiscent of the Obamacare protests of 2009. But the coverage this time, yeah, it's very different. We'll discuss that. And then this.
These officers putting their lives on the line to save the life of a man trapped inside a burning truck. Their dramatic rescue and how that man is doing in a moment here. Still ahead.
Diplomacy on the docket this week for President Trump at the White House. Later today, the president will meet with Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau. Trade is expected to be a major issue, with the Trump administration pushing to reopen negotiations on NAFTA. And later this week, the president will host Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu at the White House. Mr. Netanyahu says he and the president see eye to eye on big threats.
So then how will the White House respond on North Korea? A ballistic missile launch raising tensions yet again in Asia. So this happening as President Trump was meeting with the Japanese Prime Minister over the weekend in Florida, traveled a few hundred miles before crashing into the Sea of Japan. That launch widely seen as a test of the new president by North Korean dictator Kim Jong-un. The White House on Saturday responding this way.
The message is that we are going to reinforce and strengthen our vital alliances in the Pacific region as part of our strategy to deter and prevent the increasing hostility that we've seen in recent years from the North Korean regime.
So John Bolton, former U.S. Ambassador to the United Nations, senior fellow at the American Enterprise Institute and a Fox News contributor. How you doing? Morning to you. What did you think of President Trump's response on all this?
Well, I thought it was very important that he give a strong response with Japanese Prime Minister Abe standing beside him. And Abe had already called the test unacceptable, and Trump said we're 100% behind our ally Japan. So it was exactly the right thing to say, to show there's no daylight between the two allies against this continued increase in the North Korean threat.
What would you expect this fledgling White House to do about it?
Well, it has to reverse 8 years of an Obama policy called strategic patience, which was a synonym for doing nothing. The fact is, what's driving us on North Korea is these missile tests showed the North's continuing effort to mate a nuclear device with an intercontinental ballistic missile that can hit the United States. This particular missile, not long range enough, but they're getting the capability to do it, and we're running out of time. So the immediate provocation here, not worth a different response than what we got from the Trump administration, but putting a strategy in place to deal with this threat, which is growing more and more severe day by day, I think is a very high priority.
I thought Byron's comment was very interesting. Why do you put Iran on notice 2 weeks ago, and yet the response in this case is much more subdued, shall we say?
Well, I think the circumstances are very different. The threat from the North is more acute in some senses because they've detonated 5 nuclear devices. We know they've got that capability, but they don't yet have a capability to put it on American targets. The difference with Iran is the Obama administration nuclear agreement with the other members of the Security Council in Germany, which Trump was unequivocal during the campaign, he found utterly unacceptable. So what Flynn did, I think, properly was say to Iran, there's a new sheriff in town, we're not going to put up with this, don't count, and implicitly he was saying, don't count on this agreement being around much longer.
We played we read the New York Times comment about how they're analyzing President Trump's response. The Hill had this, peace through strength, a direct reference to President Ronald Reagan and also what President Trump, then candidate Trump, talked about during the campaign. Do you see an interpretation of that statement so far in his response, be it Iran or North Korea or elsewhere?
Well, certainly the president's policies in specifics as they've come out, I think, are consistent with a peace through strength approach. But he needs to do a lot more, and I think the real onus now is on Defense Secretary Mattis to rebuild the defense budget after the depredations of 8 years of the Obama administration. If you don't have the fundamental strength in your military capability, it's hard to achieve the Reagan result.
Well, Mattis was just in Asia last week.
And I think
South Korea, Japan.
Exactly. And talking to them about not only the North Korean nuclear threat, but the belligerent Chinese approach in the South China Sea and the East China Sea, which is another urgent requirement, I think, for the administration to develop a strategy to say to the Chinese, you are not going to create a new Chinese province in the South China Sea.
President Obama was challenged by North Korea in the first couple of months, too. They did an underground test, and you saw the way that relationship unfolded. I mean, there's very little progress over the next 8 years. Until you get to China, you get China to affect North Korea, you're pretty much at a stalemate. Having said that, you've got this photo from over the weekend with President Trump and the Prime Minister from Japan spending 2 days together and playing golf and apparently having a pretty good time together. I would assume that they talked about missile defense in Japan, just like it's been talked about in South Korea. Fair assumption or not?
Absolutely. The Japanese are very worried about North Korea. It's, in fact, one of the reasons that North Korea and Iran have spent so much time cooperating on ballistic missiles is because of the concern that Japan expressed after the North Korean test in 1998. So I think this reveals the proliferation problem of both Iran and North Korea is something that Obama did not deal with effectively, that's going to test the Trump administration. It is already.
You know, just from 35,000 feet now, one final comment on this. World leaders are watching to see how this White House reacts. Last comment.
No, absolutely. All these crises are connected. When America demonstrates strength in one, it reverberates in others. And it has a compounding effect. I think for 8 years people saw weakness. After the last 3 weeks, I'm hoping they see strength.
Thank you, sir. Good to see you in person. From New York today, John Bolt. Thank you.
Glad to be with you.
Shannon, what's next?
Well, Texas lawmakers are looking to take action against sanctuary cities, pushing a bill to punish cities refusing to enforce federal immigration laws. Coming up, we have got Texas Lieutenant Governor Dan Patrick, who is pushing for that bill.
Also, Shannon, a race against the clock. A damaged dam in North Carolina forcing 200,000 to evacuate their homes. A live report from the scene. Adam Housley on that tense situation. Next, here.
It was a tough call to make. It was the right call to make to protect the public. The dam is solid. The control structure has been damaged. We're working to assess that.
Nearly 200,000 people in Northern California forced to leave their homes as a spillway for the country's tallest dam is threatening to burst. Folks living below told to get out right away.
Everyone's panicking. Everybody just has to remember that we're okay at the moment. Try to keep calm.
It's just a little scary.
Phone started going off and we just immediately loaded up the kids and took off. It's scary. More overwhelmed, definitely.
Authorities issued the evacuation order yesterday after engineers discovered a large hole, which they say was caused by erosion. Adam Housley is live in Yuba City, California, near one of the affected areas. All right, Adam, so what do we know at this moment?
Well, Shannon, right here we're alongside the Feather River, and that river actually comes directly from the dam. The water levels here are very high. What we know at this moment is they made some headway last night. In fact, they were worried about that auxiliary spillway collapsing, and basically what that is, it's just a lower part of the earthen dam that the water is meant to spill over to help lower the level. It's not meant to be a long-term solution, and it basically was working for over 30 hours. So that caused the deterioration, and that caused them to be worrisome about the possibility that it would collapse, bringing potentially a 30-foot wall of water down. What they got a chance to do overnight was to get the water down below that area where the water was spilling over. They're still trying to drain the lake down a bit. It allowed them to basically stop the worry of collapse of that area, and now when the sun comes up here within this hour, they're trying to get engineers in there right away to get a daylight look. They believe they made enough headway to put some rock in there, to pack it, to hopefully resecure it before the next storms come in about 4 days, Shannon.
Right. So, Adam, any word on when people may be able to return home, see how things are there, and get back to life as normal if they can?
Yeah, I mean, some people were complaining that they had to evacuate, and now that may not have needed to. And as officials said last night, and even the authorities we spoke to here overnight said, hey, it's better to be safe than sorry. Some good news, though, we've seen in the last couple of hours. They've reopened the bridges across the Feather River here. These were all closed down when we got here last night. They believe they're cautiously optimistic of letting people back in this morning. A lot of it's going to determine on what they see in the daylight at that dam. If they do believe they can pack that thing and get it back into place, they'll let people back in here. If they don't, it could be several days because, again, rains come Thursday into Friday here, at least the heavier rains, and they believe that it's Friday night into Saturday where that level of that lake will start coming up.
All right. Well, as you said, better safe than sorry in these situations. Adam Housley, thank you.
Caught another frightening scene, Northern California, an 81-year-old man clinging to a tree branch after he was swept away by rushing floodwaters. And luckily for him, there was a National Guard helicopter close by assessing damage by the floods. That's ironic. Help quickly arrived and then airlifted the 81-year-old man to safety, and he's going to be okay. And they say without that help nearby, there's a really good chance that would not have ended that way. So good for him.
That is amazing. I had a chance one time to watch these rescue teams that prepare with the helicopters in D.C. to go through these drills. They're very, very dangerous. We may take it for granted because you see them a lot, but they're risking their lives.
Great stuff there. We talked about the drought for so long in California. It's anything but right now. So plenty of moisture there in the Golden State. 27 past the hour now.
Well, White House National Security Advisor Michael Flynn under fire over what he did or didn't tell the White House, but his phone calls with Russian leaders. Reports the vice president is upset with the retired general. So is Flynn's job already in jeopardy? Plus this.
This is what democracy looks like. This is what democracy looks like.
So the anger is spilling over. Lawmakers, largely Republican lawmakers, holding town hall meetings with voters. And, well, we see the response. Protesters demanding Obamacare be saved in part. And so the question today, are the protests the mirror image to the rise of the Tea Party from 2009? Have a look at that today on a Monday morning.
Want to be let out of here, you're welcome to go. Now wait a minute. Now wait a minute. Now wait a minute. Now wait a minute. Wait a minute. Wait a minute.
Let's take a look now at Wall Street. The market's opening just a short time ago. Investors watching to see if the rally will continue after the Dow hit another all-time high on Friday. I know how Hammer likes that when it happens. Stocks may get a boost today as the Senate is expected to finally confirm Steve Mnuchin as Treasury Secretary, bringing a Wall Street veteran to the job for the first time in 8 years.
It's quite a bump on a Monday morning, huh? Off we go. Republicans now in the spotlight of public events back in their home district. The left is fired up. In some cases, angry protesters pushing back on the repeal of Obamacare. Here is just one example from the state of Florida.
This is what democracy looks like. This is what democracy looks like. This is what democracy looks like.
So that's what we saw in Georgia. Check that rally. Liberal protesters chanting. You see clearly holding a lot of signs, too, during an event held by Georgia's 2 Republican senators. From Washington, Chief National Correspondent Ed Henry picks it up from there. And, Ed, what's going on? What have you learned about the organization for this and the reaction?
Well, Bill, a lot of this is about Obamacare, and Democrats fired up trying to block a repeal of Obamacare. But there are a lot of Democrats here in Washington wondering where was this energy for Hillary Clinton, of course. Now we're seeing it, this so-called resist movement against President Donald Trump. And as you mentioned, we saw over the weekend more of these protests. Florida, Georgia, North Carolina, all the way across the country to Utah as well. Remember, Jason Chaffetz, the Republican congressman, he faced some of that right there, where there were about 1,000 people at one of his constituent meetings. Again, a lot of people angry about Obamacare, but also James Sensenbrenner over the weekend in Wisconsin facing heat about the overall Trump agenda. Watch.
How much more will you tolerate before you start to speak out, respectfully but forcefully, against Donald Trump and his lack of respect for the checks and balances in our system of government? We need you to speak out, sir. It's your responsibility.
Folks, did you listen to what I just said? Restrain yourselves and respect everybody, and this is not a meeting which will be dominated by the people who can yell the loudest.
You heard it there. Restrain yourself, said the Republican congressman. Democratic Senate leader Chuck Schumer says this energy is something that's going to fire them up, while White House officials say, wait a second, there will be a replacement for Obamacare. Watch. So that is the key there for the president in terms of finding a replacement for Obamacare. You hear from his policy director there, Stephen Miller. He has a lot of energy behind him. The president does on the other side of this in terms of repealing Obamacare. The trick for Republicans is going to be finding that replacement so they can get people to calm down and make sure and realize that there are going to be people who will still be covered even after there's repeal.
Stay on it. Ed, thanks. Ed Henry there in Washington. Shannon has more now.
Well, are there shades of 2009 in these protests? As you'll recall, that year brought about the rise of the Tea Party, with lawmakers involved in passing Obamacare facing backlash during town hall events. Here's a trip down memory lane.
Now, wait a minute. Now, wait a minute. Now, wait a minute. Now, wait a minute. Wait a minute. Wait a minute.
How in the world are we going to pay for it? And
the answer is, I don't know.
If these plans are not good enough for you and your family, sir, then they certainly aren't good enough for us and our family.
Let's talk about it with Richard Fowler, Democratic strategist and radio talk show host, and Katie Pavlich, editor for townhall.com. Both are Fox News contributors. Good to have you on this Monday.
Good morning.
Be here.
Okay, so I want to take a little flashback along with those clips to how this was covered. CBS News talked about how conservatives were turning this into a nasty national shouting match. President Obama urging Americans to ignore those who are trying to scare and mislead at these meetings. Talked about how they were children. It was uncivilized. It was disruptive. Opponents shouting down members of Congress. Police have to be called in. Richard, the media didn't like it back then, but all the coverage I've heard this weekend, they sound pretty celebratory.
Listen, I think there's something to be said. I can't speak for the media, but I can speak for, I think, as somebody who believes in the Constitution and believe in Americans, that it's good to see if folks are out there and engaged in the civic process. Now, what I will say is this. I think the reason why we're in this situation, Shannon, is because as Trump's senior advisors are holding their cards close to the vest, but we're talking about people's health care here. So Republicans have really got to talk about what this replacement is going to be in specifics, not platitudes, or they're going to see more of these week after week, and it's going to eventually snowball and could cost them the Senate in 2018.
I mean, Katie, does that ring true to you? Because we know that the Senate map is really tough for Democrats in 2018, but if they can leverage what they're feeling now, Senator Schumer, the minority leader there, hoping to be the majority leader, saying that he's never seen this much energy in the streets since Vietnam, he thinks there's something they can harness there and win.
I think Chuck Schumer is exaggerating a little bit. And I want to go back to your first point really quickly, Shannon, with the media. I mean, we had Obama administration officials equating Tea Party activists with suicide bombers in Times Square. We had the New York Times saying that the Tea Party was a Hezbollah faction of the Republican Party that had to be squashed out. And so that was certainly a different tone back then that the media was taking with the Tea Party movement that I doubt we'll see when they treat the left in terms of them wanting to do the same. But in terms of getting results here, look, the Tea Party was very effective. We saw historic elections in 2010, 2014, and then, of course, now with President Trump being in office. And so it wasn't just about going to town halls and shouting people down. It was about getting some policy positions on the table, organizing communities, and most importantly, finding candidates who were willing to run against incumbents that people didn't like who voted for Obamacare.
Well, and speaking of organizing, Politico has an interesting dive into some of these groups and who they are. They talk about this group that's come together called Indivisible, and it's been put together by Democratic Hill staffers, former and maybe some current ones as well. But they're partnering up with groups like MoveOn.org, which we know is funded in part. It's Public Matter out there by George Soros, and other groups, Richard, who they've made no mistake of the fact that they want to undermine this president and his legitimacy at every single term. So, some say Tea Party, others say this is very organized astroturf. It's funded well. One congressman predicting when the money runs out, these protests will stop. How do you respond?
I don't agree with that. I think there's clearly a pulse here, and I think if you take the pulse of the American people, there are a lot of them that don't appreciate Donald Trump. His approval ratings show that, and I think here's the question. Here's the truth. The truth is that the Tea Party was well funded by folks like the Koch brothers and Sheldon Adelson and other groups, and this is the same, right? So there is some funding going into this. There's nothing wrong with that. I think what you see out there is people power saying that the Trump administration and Republicans can't say repeal without a real replacement, and Republicans haven't answered that.
Katie, I know you're probably going to want to take issue with some of those funding questions because a lot of these groups started just meeting in somebody's house or in a backyard or having a cookout. In the earliest stages, they certainly were not linked to groups like that.
That's absolutely true. I remember going to people's homes and they were having these meetings about how they could change their own communities, change how things were going locally, and then find candidates again to run against the incumbents who had voted for Obamacare. But I just have to reject real quickly this idea that the Tea Party is the same same as the leftist groups that we've seen rioting in the streets, wearing hats that represent female body parts. I mean, the Tea Party was far better behaved than the protesters
rioting
we've
in
seen.
the streets, that's a big
Yeah,
step.
were you at the inauguration?
That's a big step.
That happened. We've seen fires lit all over the country. Richard, why are you interrupting me again? Could you please just let me finish my point?
A couple of punks burn a car and you blame it on the entire progressive movement. That is unfair. Just like it's unfair to blame Dylan Roof on the Republican movement. You can't do that.
Richard, what about the millions of women who are marching with hats that represent female genitalia? Okay, the Tea Party is not the same thing.
Saying that they want women's rights to be protected.
You have to allow me to talk. You can't just interrupt me every time we're on air together.
We're going to have to agree to disagree, but I think the one point you would agree on is that it's tough when one or several misbehaved people are linked to an entire movement. It takes some time and effort to parse out the facts there, and we always want to do that so that
far more prevalent on the left than the right.
Okay,
I don't know about that.
Richard, we got to leave it there. Thank you both very much. Good to see you.
20 minutes now before the hour. In a moment here, a push to punish so-called sanctuary cities. Republicans are trying it in the state of Texas. What's the effect of such a law? The Lieutenant Governor, Dan Patrick, is live next on that. Plus, there's this today.
Heart-stopping video of Florida police rescuing a man just moments before his burning SUV exploded. Take a look. You can hear some panicked commotion on the scene as flames engulfed the car after a crash in Titusville, that's east of Orlando. Witnesses say the driver got out but collapsed right near the SUV, so still officers had to get him and pull him away. They did that just seconds before the car exploded. The victim was rushed to the hospital, where we understand he's still there with injuries, but man, they are heroes. That's what they do. They run into those situations.
Some dramatic stuff, too. I mean, listening to the sound of his voice, too. So our best to him now, recovering in the hospital there. From Florida now, let's move to Texas. It could become the first state to take a significant stand against sanctuary cities. That state Senate passing a bill that would withhold funding, all money now from cities, and even allow criminal charges against local officials who refuse to endorse federal immigration laws. Texas Governor Greg Abbott defending the bill, saying this, quote, elected officials cannot pick and choose which laws they will obey. Officials who refuse to enforce immigration laws should be defunded, fined, and criminally prosecuted, end quote. Texas Lieutenant Governor Dan Patrick with me now. And, sir, good morning to you. I don't think you will disagree with what I just read, but tell us why this law would be necessary, sir.
Let me give you some facts, Bill. These are Department of Homeland Security facts. From June of 2011 until the end of last month, we booked into our Texas jails over 212,000 criminal aliens. We charged them with more than 566,000 crimes, Bill, including 67,501 assaults, 67,213 drug charges, 6,001 sexual assaults, and even 684 kidnappings. This is crime in our country by criminal aliens that our citizens should not have to endure. And when you have local elected officials, Bill, whether they are mayors or county judges or sheriffs or police chiefs who will turn these people loose and not follow federal law, they're putting our citizens, all of our citizens, at risk.
Okay, so I am of the understanding that many on the local level have reacted to this favorably. Many of the sheriffs, except for Austin, Texas. That's Travis County. The sheriff there is Sally Hernandez. Now,
we have 254 counties, so we have 254 sheriffs.
I think the
only
question,
one,
sir,
Sally Hernandez.
Yep, I get it. Let me just get to the question here. Well,
I'm sorry.
How do you believe people respond when it comes to money and to funding? Do they act or behave differently? I think that's the question.
I'm sorry, Bill. They hopefully will act differently, but when you listen to the crime stats that I gave you, and I don't have a teleprompter or a cue card, they're seared into my memory because of the victims of those crimes. When you hear those crime statistics, you would think it wouldn't take any financial incentive to follow federal law. You know, as Republicans, we believe in a secure border, the Constitution, and the rule of law, and the Democrats do not. And so out of our 254 sheriffs in Texas, one has doubled down and says they will ignore federal law, the president, and the state of Texas. And even, Bill, while we were passing this law last week, we had the Dallas County Commissioners Court issue a resolution to welcome illegal immigrants to the community, saying it made it safer. It doesn't make it safer, Bill. Look, many people come here for the American dream and are not hardened criminals. We need a legal immigration system so they can come here. But many are hardened criminals, gang members, MS-13. Go down the list, Bill. These are dangerous people killing Americans. And it needs to end. And it's one of the reasons, Bill, because this sheriff isn't doing her job in Travis County, Austin. That's one of the reasons we had ICE raids this week with warrants finding criminal aliens. This sheriff won't do her job. And under our bill, she is subject to criminal penalties, civil penalties, and losing funding.
If it goes that far, will you take action against her?
You bet. You bet.
Such as?
If she ignores the law and puts our citizens at risk, she faces criminal penalties. And she can be sued by victims of crime, and we will take away her funding. We're not going to mess around here with this issue, Bill. When I gave you that statistics, again, think about this. In 5 years, criminal aliens, and of those about 66% were here illegally, those people have committed over 500,000 crimes, Bill. We don't have time to have put up with the nonsense of some political sheriff who doesn't want to follow the law because of her leftist ideology. We're not going to put up with it.
Yeah, let me just, one last question here, and we'll try and wrap this up. What do you think the effect of this law will be when it comes to law and order in your state?
Bill, I hear from the rank and file officers and troopers and constables and sheriff deputies on the streets all the time. They want to be able to do their job. They are tired of the elected officials, and in some cases the sheriff that's an elected official in Texas, telling them they can't do their job. When they apprehend someone that they believe is a dangerous criminal, they believe they're here illegally, they want to do their job. And they want to be able to hold those people in jail until ICE picks them up. And the second part of this, Bill, why Trump is right about building the wall, when we deport these people, right now it's been fairly easy for them to come back and commit more crimes. We see it all the time. You find someone who's here illegally and you find out they've crossed the border 3 or 4 times and been arrested. We need a secure border, Bill, so when we deport these criminals, they can't get back. It's a two-step process, and I'm here to let America know that every sheriff in the country is now a border sheriff because they have these illegal criminals in their states, and you ask any sheriff, and they will tell you that. This is a serious issue, whether it's Kate Steinle in San Francisco or a victim of a crime in Texas. It's time for this nonsense to end. In Texas, in the Texas Senate, where I'm proud to be the president of the Senate, we led on that. We put it on the express track. Governor Abbott asked us to do so. We passed it. I'm waiting for the House to pass it and get it to the governor's desk for a signature.
Sir, thank you for your time. Dan Patrick,
thank you, Bill.
Lieutenant Governor in Texas. We will follow it from here. Thank you, sir.